Last May, the United States Supreme Court overturned decades of federal Clean Water Act protections for over half the freshwater wetlands throughout the country. One result is that the drinking water resources relied upon by millions of Americans are under threat of being harmed. But there are other pressures on America's water bodies as well, pressures that go beyond that court ruling. Highway construction, development, drought, climate change. All of those factors threaten our country's ecosystems and environment. In mid-April, the American Rivers Organization identified the 10 most endangered rivers in America. And today we have a representative and partners of that organization to discuss all of this. But first, I want to invite you guys to visit our podcast.leantotheleft.net website, where you'll find thumbnails and links to all of our episodes. You can subscribe there too for free. And don't forget to give us a rating. 5 stars would be oh so super cool. Now, the image behind me, just to let you know, is from the Waccamaw River in South Carolina. I took that picture a couple of years ago when I was doing a little exploration of the river with a local river guide. So now let's talk about our rivers and why so many are endangered and what we can do about it. Joining us are Cheryl Kale, chairperson of Idle No More South Carolina and acting chief of the Waccamaw Indian people, Janae Davis, American Rivers Southeast Conservation Director, Becky Ryan, North Coast Office Director with South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, and Deborah Buffkin, Executive Director of Winyah Rivers Alliance, which covers 7 different watersheds within North and South Carolina. Hey, Cheryl, thanks for bringing this important issue to my attention. Becky, can you fill us in on the overall picture nationally? Just how critical is that Supreme Court decision on water?
Yeah, nationally, our wetlands and river watersheds are under threat. Last year's HIJACKED versus EPA Supreme Court decision was just the latest of several decisions over the years that have greatly reduced federal protections for freshwater wetlands and rivers. The HIJACKED decision limited Clean Water Act protections to only those wetlands with a continuous surface level connection to other federally protected water bodies like our rivers.
Okay.
But many wetlands instead have groundwater connections to rivers. So the Environmental Defense Fund estimates that the wetlands now unprotected equate to an area almost the size of California. And this has tremendous impacts on our drinking water, rivers, flooding issues, and wildlife dependent on these wetland systems. Even if there's not a continuous surface level connection, these wetlands are important for storing floodwaters, filtering out pollutants, and providing habitat to wildlife in the watersheds of our rivers. Like you mentioned, a lot of our drinking water comes from rivers. So it's very crucial that we have these protections for our wetlands that impact our rivers.
Okay. Hey, Janae, can you give us an overview of the Most Endangered Rivers program? That's really what got me interested in doing this episode. Just maybe some quick thumbnails of each will be okay if you can do that.
Yeah, definitely. So American Rivers Endangered Rivers program seeks to spotlight threats to clean water and rivers around the country and the need to protect our clean waters, our clean drinking water, whether it be for drinking or flooding or green spaces. Our rivers provide a variety of services to the public, and we want to preserve those services. We see water as a basic need. Everyone, no matter where they live, deserves clean water. And much of our water, especially our drinking water, comes from our local rivers and streams. And the America's Most Endangered Rivers listing is a listing that we provide to the public every year. Okay. And it's one of our biggest campaigns. But I do want to make the point that this program is not, the intent of it is not to highlight, the most polluted rivers in the nation. But those specific rivers that are at a crucial decision point where that decision could severely impact the health of that river. And so the Little PD made number 5 on that list this year. And one of the goals of this work that we're doing is to really work with our partners on the ground who are at the front lines of these issues to highlight their work, the work that they deem it as important, and to support that work.
Okay. Janae, the little PD is in South Carolina. Can you just list them off for me, the other ones that are on the list?
Yeah, sure can. So number 1 is Rivers of New Mexico. Number 2 is the Big Sunflower and Yazoo Rivers in Mississippi. Number 3 is the Duck River in Tennessee. Number 4 is the Santa Cruz River in Arizona. We talked about number 5, which is the Little PD River in both North Carolina and South Carolina. We're focusing specifically on South Carolina for this one.
Okay.
Number 6 is the Farmington River in Connecticut and Massachusetts. Number 7 is the Trinity River in California. Number 8 is the Kabuk River in Alaska. Number 9 is the Tijuana River in California and Mexico. And number 10 is the Blackwater River in West Virginia.
So all of these rivers are some way threatened. Is that right?
They're threatened by a crucial decision point that is coming up within the next year. And this year, though, what we really wanted to do was highlight the post-Sackett world that we live in, and really highlight the impacts or the potential impacts of the Sackett decision on our nation's rivers moving forward.
Okay. Hey, Deborah, why is the Little PD River so important that it should be protected from highway development, which I understand is the big threat here?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Bob. Well, first of all, how long do we have? For me to tell you the value of the Little PD River, it could take me all day, but I'll just keep it really short for you. We know the Little PD River is about 118 miles long, and it flows through North and South Carolina, but it is full of forested wetlands that provide homes, of course, for endangered wildlife and fish. But to protect Little PD River from development is crucial for different reasons. You have environmental reasons, we have economic reasons, and we have cultural aspects. And so going in a little bit more detail on that, the environmental significance, for example, the biodiversity is home to a rich array of wildlife, as we were talking about just a few minutes ago, including many species of fish, birds, and other aquatic and terrestrial organisms. We have water quality. The rivers like the Little PD River play a vital role in maintaining water quality for all the local communities, all the communities that live along the river. The wetlands, for example, protecting the wetlands on the Little PD River. Wetlands act as natural water purifiers. So they provide clean water for the communities, and they help filter the water, the wetlands. That's why it's so important to protect those wetlands. We have habitat protection, for example. The river and its surrounding areas provide so much habitat for all the wildlife that live along those rivers. And whenever you have development come in, you're causing fragmentation, which separates these ecosystems, and it puts these endangered species at risk, or these species at risk. And then you have your economic benefits. For example, ecotourism. I think that these rivers provide so much opportunity for people to get outdoors, and I believe our youth are neglecting that right now, the opportunities to get outside. So you have ecotourism benefits. And if you destroy parts of this river, you won't have those economic opportunities with ecotourism that you would have before. So tourism and recreation is huge. The communities that I grew up in, Mullins, Nichols area, we're on the river all the time. That's what we do in our area. So that's extremely important. And a lot of money is brought into South Carolina through ecotourism, through people getting on the rivers, through fishing opportunities, hunting opportunities. And if you destroy these rivers and these wetlands, people aren't going to want to use that for recreation and outdoor activities and sportsman activities. So you have to think about the tourism, and you have to think about the recreation. And then you have to look at your cultural importance as well, your cultural heritage. The river has significant cultural and historic value for the local communities, including the indigenous peoples who've lived there in the area for centuries. So protecting that river helps preserve those cultural ties and the historical sites. And the community identity, going back to what I was saying before about our communities being on the river, Little PD River, that's what we grew up on. And I know this group has heard this story many times, but I literally was fishing before I could walk on the Little Petey River. So it's a part of who I am, and it's a part of these communities. People living along these rivers. That's who we are. It is an interstate on the water. It is a way to keep these communities together, and that's a way of transportation. We
Okay.
fish, we swim, we love these rivers, we enjoy it. So it's a huge identifier for our communities, and it's essential to protect these communities or protect this river for those reasons. And of course, you have the ecosystem services. We have the protecting it for future generations, for the natural beauty and the resources, and maintaining that ecological balance on these rivers. And then you've got the impact of development, what it could cause of pollution. It could destroy our clean water on these rivers. And this is a pristine river that is, we monitor it every week. It's a pretty clean river, and we're really afraid that it will be, the water quality will be devastated with any kind of development coming through there. And
Okay.
you've got to remember one of the main important things, and I'm sorry, Bob, I'm not making it long, Bob, but these
That's fine.
communities along this river have flooded, including my parents twice, 2016 and 18. These communities have already flooded upstream and downstream.
Mhm.
So when you start talking about development, destroying these wetlands, you're talking about increasing the likelihood of flooding for these communities that have already lost everything twice. So those are just a few reasons why I believe we need to protect the Little Petey River.
All right. I just have to ask you this. You said that you caught your first fish before you could walk.
Oh, yes, sir. I have pictures of me. My parents
What
have
was
pictures.
it? What was that fish? What kind of a fish?
That was probably a little brim. I think it was a little brim or a little red breast.
A
We don't
little
have
brim.
those too much in the river anymore, the red breast. Yes, sir. Skiing by the age of 5 too. Water skiing. Yes, sir.
That's pretty cool. All right.
Could I jump in and talk about the specific threats to the Little
Sure.
Petey River?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so like Deborah mentioned, it's certainly under threat from development. That's probably a familiar story to many of your listeners, both generally as the region grows, and this is one of the fastest growing regions in the country, and very specifically from a proposed new interstate, I-73, which has been discussed for over 30 years, but is closer than ever to being built. It is fully permitted and would impact over 300 acres of wetlands, the Little Petey Heritage Preserve, which is a protected area meant to be preserved in perpetuity, historic family farms predating the U.S. Constitution, and of course the river itself. So small rural communities have already faced their homes being flooded, like Deborah mentioned, and a new interstate will likely make that worse. But so far, its main obstacle has been funding. The project to connect I-95 outside of Latta near Florence to the SC Highway 22 between Aner and Conway is likely to cost at least $2 billion, billion with a B. And Horry County, where Myrtle Beach and Coastal Carolina University are located, is proposing a sales tax referendum to fund a portion of the project from SC Highway 22 to the neighboring county line at $450 million. This will be on the ballot in November for Horry County's voters to decide on, and that's that decision point that Janae was referencing.
Okay. All right. That's good information. Janae, how does American Rivers determine which rivers qualify for the endangered list?
Yeah, it's a really good question. First of all, we put out a call every year that goes out to both our staff and our partners and anybody we know to nominate a river.
Okay.
And so we get a slew of nominations that comes back to a core team of people within the organization who've been working on this campaign or our Endangered Rivers program for years now. And so there are three basic criteria that this core team of people evaluate. So the first one is the river's significance to people and wildlife. And so similar to what Deborah mentioned, we look at the ecology of the area and the biodiversity of the area, the plants, the animals, but also the significance to tribes like the Waccamaw Indian people and the communities that live along those rivers. The second criteria is that we look at the magnitude of the threat to the river and the surrounding communities, especially in the light of climate change and environmental justice. And also specifically this year, the potential impacts or the impacts resulting from the HIJACKED decision. And so anticipate what those impacts could be and the magnitude of those impacts. And the third criteria is, as I spoke about previously and what Becky alluded to, is that there's a decision within the next year that the public can influence. And so there's a crucial decision point in highlighting the democratic process into shaping what can and cannot be allowed to happen on our rivers. And so we use those three criteria to help us decide that final list of 10 rivers. And so, and once that list is decided, each river comes with a call to action, because as I talked about a moment ago, there's a decision that the public can influence. And so we try to use the endangered rivers listing to mobilize the public to protect their rivers. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, Cheryl, what can individuals do to protect our rivers?
Bob, that's a good question. It's really about awareness,
Mhm.
education, and responsibility. So first, as individuals, we can learn about our rivers and why protecting them matters so much. So there's plenty of resources and tools that provide free training and education. The EPA's Watershed Academy, the USGS has a water science school, and they provide tools that are, I'd say, consumer friendly, basic, 101. And I think that people, when they're asked where the water comes from, especially from the tap, they really don't have an understanding of actually where it comes from and what makes river protection important. And second, we can take small steps to address the pollution in our rivers and wetlands, such as helping to keep them free from plastics. Just simple things like reducing use or removing household waste that eventually makes its way into the rivers through things like storm events or illegal dumping. One of the river keepers from Winyah Rivers Alliance, Aaron Donmauer, and I went to clean up a wetland. And if I said we got a ton of garbage out of that wetland, it would be pretty easy to say that we got a ton of garbage out of that wetland. And it was mostly from illegal dumping. So doing things like that help. And unfortunately, not everyone thinks about it. So our river keepers end up spending a lot of time organizing these cleanups. Simple step, volunteering for a river cleanup. That's another simple step each one of us can take. And not only does it keep our rivers aesthetically clean, but it also helps to provide us and aquatic life with clean water. So I'm going to go a little bit more into this, the other part with responsibility. We have individual responsibility, but the more challenging step has to do with industry and corporate responsibility, particularly where there's failure to keep toxic pollutants from being directly discharged into our rivers. And many people don't understand how that works. Our rivers, lakes, streams, and reservoirs are among the water bodies defined as surface waters. And again, wetlands connect many of these water bodies. And besides supporting the necessary ecosystems, they also provide a majority of our drinking water. So it's really important for human health that these sources are protected from harmful chemicals. And you would think this would be a no-brainer, Bob, but because we all rely on water to survive, but it really takes active civic engagement to ensure that, as I say, corporate greed does not trump human need. And I say that because most of us think from the human part of it, and it isn't just the humans that need clean water, but it's all life that needs clean water. In the Clean Water Act, as we know, it was established over 50 years ago, and it actually was to address some of the problems of pollution. And under that act, the authority was given to the Bureau of Water to develop the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System program. I call it the Pee in Your Pool program because it's actually permitting industry to discharge into the waters at certain levels that they're supposed to adhere to. It also requires that they, through this permitting, they follow up with monitoring, sampling, and reporting the discharges. And our state and South Carolina is responsible for the permitting and administering the program under agreement with the EPA. Not all states have that. Some are administered by the EPA. But this program only addresses the pollutants that are what are called direct discharges. In other words, you know where they're coming from, such as industrial or municipal waste. And they're called point source pollutions because you can identify the source. Other pollutants end up making their way into the rivers through stormwater runoff or indirect discharges, such as agricultural waste. So think of like hog or chicken farms, or fertilizers and chemicals that are applied on agricultural lands. But individually, we help by taking steps such as not using storm drains for things like dumping oil or detergents, reducing the use of fertilizer and chemical pesticides on our own lawns, and even not flushing medications. So there's a real simple steps that everybody can contribute, make small contributions to protecting our rivers. That the other thing, and I think this is where we're at now as individuals, what we can do to protect our rivers is demand that our elected officials use the science behind the impacts of development and these programs and how the land use affects our rivers. So more often than not, when land is converted into what is useful for humans, there are negative impacts to the rivers. And even the process of construction and mining for the necessary materials yields negative impacts. So the larger the project, the greater the negative impact. And that's not stewardship. That's our responsibility. It's extractive and it's destructive. And I don't believe it should be that way. We share the earth as sentient beings. We should be living at a higher level of awareness and responsibility.
Wow. You just led me into the question that I've been wanting to ask Deborah, and that is, how important is this upcoming election when it comes to protecting our rivers? Cheryl, you made the point of corporate greed trumping. How did you say that?
Corporate greed does not trump human need.
Yeah, right.
Or as we say it in the PFAS world, health before wealth.
Okay.
Which is something I coined a long time ago, but it's really true that it's got to be, because in the long run, it ends up costing all of us.
Yeah.
And that's the science behind what does this do as you have impacts. An example, flooding. Flooding not only causes water to come into homes, but it actually brings toxic chemicals from great distances at times into people's communities. And then you have a problem with you're impacting that community's health and the habitat in that area that maybe was perfectly fine before that flooding incident.
Right.
So there's a lot to really consider. And I don't consider myself to be the expert in the room by any stretch of the imagination, but I've taken responsibility to learn.
Okay.
And then to advocate. And that, I think, is what all of us should be doing to protect our rivers.
Okay. All right. Now, let's get to that question, Deborah, about the upcoming election.
Absolutely.
And its importance.
And Cheryl is preaching to the choir, as
Yeah.
the old Southern saying.
For sure.
Preaching to the choir, Cheryl, you got it. But I want to say that the November 2024 election is so crucial when it comes to protecting our rivers for several reasons. Policy and legislation, for example, environmental regulations. The election will determine which political parties and candidates gain power and influence in the creation, enforcement, and rollback of many of our environmental regulations. Candidates with strong environmental platforms are likely to support and implement policies that protect our rivers from not only from pollution, but overdevelopment and degradation. That is extremely important. We want to make sure that our policymakers support environmental protections, funding for conservation programs. The election outcomes can affect federal and state budgets, and we know that, including funding allocated to conservation programs. I've talked with, for example, Governor McMaster several times about wetland protections, and we know that, for example, Interstate 73 was not listed on Governor McMaster's projects this year in South Carolina. It absolutely influences some of the funding for or against environmental protections. But we have funding for environmental protection agencies. And of course, elected officials support the environmental initiatives are more likely to ensure that adequate funding for those river conservation projects and pollution control measures are there. Then we have climate change mitigation, of course, climate policies, candidates on climate change where they're directly impacting river ecosystems, infrastructure development, when you have your legislators approving or not approving infrastructure development. And of course, public lands and waterways management. We have public land protection. Many rivers flow through public lands. So election results determine the management and protection of those lands. And we believe in land conservation and protecting those precious areas. So policies promoting the preservation of public lands can prevent harmful development and ensure that the river ecosystems remain intact. Water rights, that's going to be a big, even more. And we haven't seen it as much in South Carolina as far out west, but I believe we're going to see that a lot more upcoming. But the election will affect policies regarding water rights and usage. And I'm involved in a group called the PD River Basin Council, and that's one of the things that we discuss, water usage, and we see who's using most water in the state. But that is going to be a bigger issue coming up more in South Carolina than it is now. But those water rights and the usage, including agricultural uses, industrial uses, and municipal demands, balanced policies consider the ecological needs, and that's of course crucial for maintaining a healthy river system.
Okay.
And of course, you've got your advocacy and public awareness, your environmental advocacy. The elected officials play a significant role in raising public awareness about the importance of river protection. If you have a candidate, for example, who prioritizes environmental issues, they can help mobilize public support and encourage community involvement. And I could go on and on. I'm sorry, those are just a few examples of how important this election is going to be this year.
Okay, Deborah, it occurred to me that it's not just members of Congress or the presidency that's important here. It's also state legislative and county council.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Candidates, huh?
And we, along with the organizations that are represented here with American Rivers, Coastal Conservation League, I Don't Know More, the Waccamaw Indian Tribe, we do go to the Horry County Council meetings, the Marion County Council meetings. We try to reach out to our local county councils and just let them hear us. And we really want them to listen to the communities. If they don't listen to us, if they will just listen to the people that they represent, and just listen, open their minds and their hearts and listen to what the people that are locals and the ones that have lived here their entire lives and have farms, like Becky was saying, and that own land that are being taken for eminent domain for an interstate to nowhere. It is extremely crucial that we look into how our legislators are voting. We look into the ones that are running for election, how they plan to vote or what they stand on, and make sure that environmental protections and protections for our communities are a big priority for them. That is so important right now.
Okay. You guys made the very important point, and that is that rivers are a major source of drinking water in this country. And I guess I didn't really think about that, but it's true. And then the other point that occurred to me while you were talking, Deborah, is that people who are avid fishermen or who like to hunt along the watersheds, those people need to be thinking about this too, right?
Yes, sir. And I hope I can answer this for everyone. I don't believe they are fully understanding that right now, Bob. For example, where the interstate will be coming across the proposed I-73, the path now will be coming across the Little Petey River. There are hunting clubs in that area.
Okay.
And they're going to have to get on the interstate to get to the other side of their hunting club.
Okay.
When you're hunting on different lands and the dogs are going to a different area, they're going to be going across an interstate, for example, and just to fish. If you have to go on the interstate to get to your favorite fishing spot.
Right.
Absolutely. That's going to affect the hunting. That's going to affect the fishing. That's going to affect all of our outdoor recreational activities that these communities have been doing for so long, because we have, for example, Marion County has 3 rivers that run through it. We have the Lumber coming through there. We have the Little PD and the Big PD. There's so much outdoor recreation on those rivers, and it will be dramatically affected. And I don't know that if some are listening and some have talked with us, but we're constantly asking them. I know you're speaking to us and you're speaking amongst yourselves, but please reach out to your legislators. Please reach out to your county council. Let them know your feelings. And because if they don't hear you, they don't believe us when we tell them the communities really don't want this interstate to come through their areas. But it is going to cause a huge separation in the county, especially Marion County and Horry County.
Okay.
Not to mention that interstates are noisy. And I don't know about everybody. A lot of hunters and fishermen are going out there to seek peace and quiet.
Yeah.
And having an interstate go through nearby is going to be really noisy and just disruptive to their outdoor experience, and noise pollution also impacts wildlife. So it's not just like the annoyance of it, but it really does impact where wildlife are, their breeding habits, their ability to forage or to hunt for predators. So it's going to have impacts just by its existence, let alone the runoff impacts of just the oil and chemicals that, or bits of tires, the microplastics and chemicals from tires that will impact the river. There's just so many impacts that most people probably don't even consider for having an interstate go through our precious natural landscape.
Okay. Janae, what protections are needed to safeguard our rivers from development like we've been talking about here?
Yeah, I really think that Cheryl and Becky and Deborah really summed it up really nicely. I think they really answered that question. I would say that if I could put everything they said in like a container or just wrap it up a little bit, I feel like one of the things that we need to do is to hold industries and developers accountable for protecting our drinking water and the health of our rivers, the health of our communities. You know, the Southeast is growing exponentially, and South Carolina is growing exponentially.
Yep.
And we have to weigh the cost of development against the cost of the health of our rivers and communities. And from our perspective, it's not to say no development at all, but there are ways to develop sustainably. There are ways to provide the necessary housing, transportation, whatever it is, in a way that does not harm the environment or makes a minimal impact on the environment. And so there are ways to do that. And within this particular decision around I-73, those alternatives have not been adequately accounted for. So we need to hold our developers and our industries accountable. We need to shore up protections at the state level now that the HIJACKED decision has passed. We've lost a lot of our waters of the U.S. We need to shore up our protections at the state level. Our states and groups like our conservation groups, our tribes, our communities need to get involved in making sure that our state legislations account for the necessary protections that we need to protect our wetlands against flooding, against pollution, against being developed that would cause a host of those issues. And then we need to encourage Congress to expand the Clean Water Act to protect small streams and wetlands. Now that decision has passed, the second decision has passed, Congress can act. And I think that goes to what Deborah was talking about before, is that in the November election, who we vote for is going to have a significant impact on our wetlands and streams. And so we need folks to get out there and vote. If you love your rivers, if you love your streams, get out there and vote.
And be sure to vote for people who will protect those rivers and streams, correct?
And can I add a little to that, Bob, if it's okay?
Yeah, please.
One thing I want to say is I want to emphasize what Janae said. We are not against, we know the growth is in Horry County and in this Southeast. We know that it's here. And we are not, I will take, say for myself and Winyah Rivers Alliance, we are not against an interstate. We are opposed to the path that it is taking. We believe that there are 4-lane highways that would be much easier to access and be less damage to the environment than the route that it's taking. So I do want to say that. But so that is extremely important. And also, like Janae was saying, as far as who you elect, it matters so much to make sure that those people, and I don't like it that it's a political thing now. I don't like it that people are saying that if you protect the environment, oh, you must be a Democrat. And I hope it's okay for me to go there on this, or you're Republican. I don't like that protecting the environment has been made political. It's been made political if you don't believe in climate change. It's been made political. It's not a Republican or Democratic thing, protecting the environment, protecting the communities that we're growing, and protecting these open spaces that we want for our future generations and my grandbaby who will be here in the next couple of weeks. That's not a political issue, and it shouldn't be. So that does frustrate me.
Okay. Good points.
Yep.
Cheryl, tell us, why are the Waccamaw Indian people involved in this effort to protect the little PD?
As I mentioned before, it really is about stewardship and the responsibility to protect what's provided and in what is such a high priority for all living beings. We understand, and this is from American Rivers, life depends on rivers, but there is a deeper spiritual meaning for us concerning rivers and life, because rivers are life to us, and life doesn't encompass just a human life, but it is that life that actually sustains in some way, or it's connected to us physically, but we would really be remiss to not see that these things are spiritually connected. And just the fact that humans are made up of 2/3 of water, it should amplify the importance of rivers and our water. But why we're involved in the effort to protect the Little PD River is just simply that we recognize it as a connection to our ancestors, and it is an ancestor. Before we were here, the river existed. It produced life, it sustained life, and it shared a past with so many who came before us. Imagine, if you could, the stories that would be told if the Little PD River could talk in a way we could understand. And I think that, to me, is what gives me deep connection to the Little PD River, because I know my ancestors fished on it. They hunted near and in by that. They traveled to the other tribes by way of that river. It wasn't considered, and it's still not in large parts, a navigable river, even though with a canoe you could, but not with a larger vessel. So it's been able to stay a little bit under the radar from use.
Okay.
But here's the thing. We get to determine that a level of need exists for us that elevates our status to a greater importance than all other life now and in the future. And then at the expense of harm to another life, we justify and make it all okay through mitigation. And I was sitting there thinking, mitigation, it's somewhat of a legal term, but it simply means making the harm less severe. And it's just so, if it wasn't necessary to harm, we wouldn't have to mitigate. So why is it necessary to harm? That's a choice. And it is part and parcel, I think, to why we're facing the environmental crisis where we are today. And it's not responsible action to take. I don't think you should trade off anything when there's not a necessity to take the action in the first place. So the reality is, for us as a tribe, the development, it's merely happening just for monetary gain. And I've identified that and actually called the county council out, ask them why. They need to answer that question. Why is this so important? What are the benefits? And the only benefit is it will bring in more industry and more jobs, not jobs for communities to thrive, jobs because that's what we need. And the reality is, there's ways to have workforce development that's not centered on just bringing in a factory or manufacturing plant that's going to continue, which we have evidence that they cause harm to the environment by their discharges and what they do to the environment, and then put people to work to just survive. That's not what human existence is supposed to be about. And it certainly doesn't benefit our planet or those that we share the planet with. And for me, as an Indigenous person, as someone connected so deeply to the Little PD River, to that area, I know I'm Waccamaw, but our people have had an existence there for at least 300 years as we were moved to that area. And I think that it's just, there's a need to really address how we view ourselves. And that should be as the stewards, as responsible, higher level thinking beings, that we have things that we have been given to understand, that we can see in nature is one of the greatest teachers, that we're to learn from all these things to be able to live a better life on this planet. And I think it's needed. But with the development happening and merely having it for monetary gain, and with this narrative being spun that it's the answer to what is needed, I ask this question: needed for who?
Good question. Okay. So let's talk about how people can help monetarily. Do your organizations accept contributions, need contributions? And if so, how can people help out? Deborah, you want to take that one?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Protecting the Little Petey River, of course, is going to require a concerted effort from individuals, communities, organizations. It's been a great opportunity to work with organizations that are presented here. But people can help in a lot of different ways. Contributions can impact the preservation of this natural resource, but there are different ways they can get involved. One easy way is educating others. Spread awareness about the importance of the Little Petey River, spreading it through social media, community meetings, local events, sharing posts that you already see. Social media, everyone's on social media now, it seems like. So just what I was speaking about a few minutes ago, people tell us that they don't want the interstate taking the path that it's taken now, but they're not telling others. They think they're talking amongst the community, but the community is not telling the legislators. So I believe spreading awareness to people, correct education, the right education, spreading awareness about the importance of it. And of course, you can contact your local, state, and federal representatives and advocate for stronger environmental protections. And to participate in hearings, because we do go to a lot of these county council meetings and these hearings, but it would be great to see more of the community come out. And volunteering, that's something especially for our organization. River cleanups, we have cleanups quite often on all 7 rivers that we monitor. We need help with the cleanups. We have volunteer water quality monitoring. We cannot do it without the volunteers, because 7 rivers in South Carolina and North Carolina, that's a lot of river to cover. So we always need help and volunteers. We need volunteers for projects that restore native vegetation, for example, and habitats along the riverbanks. That's another thing. Looking at native plants and native species, and that can improve water quality and, of course, support wildlife. You can support your conservation organizations. Yes, you can donate. We all take financial contributions, I believe. So the financial contributions to the local environmental organizations and nonprofits that are dedicated to protecting the Little Petey River and that can fund critical conservation efforts, including some of the ones that aren't represented here, but there's Petey Land Trust, Open Space Institute. Those are land conservation organizations. Memberships, fundraisers. Become a member of the organizations. Join in their fundraisers when they have events. That helps bring some of that monetary contributions in that we need to continue to work, because we are a 501c3 nonprofit. Reduce pollution, like Cheryl was saying a while ago. Adopt sustainable practices at home, such as using fewer pesticides and fertilizers, single-use plastics, and then properly disposing of all your waste. Community involvement, join in community groups. That is so important, and let the people know. And we are in the process of starting some community groups now, trying to get communities together to have open conversations on these topics. And support local businesses, especially those that prioritize sustainability. Those are just a few ways to help support this initiative. People can play a pivotal role, of course, in protecting the Little Petey River, and of course by advocating for its preservation, participating in conservation activities, supporting the organizations, adopting sustainable practices. And these contributions, of course, will be crucial in funding legal advocacy, for example, conservation projects, educational programs, especially educating our youth. That is so important. Research and necessary infrastructure that ensures that this river, this beautiful Little Petey River, remains pristine and a vibrant and healthy ecosystem for future generations.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I will put in the show notes so you guys can check this out if you like. But I'll put in the show notes addresses where you can reach out to the various organizations here.
Bob, if you can, for this is Idle No More. I know Waccamaw Indian people I'm representing as the acting chief, but this is outside of the tribe, and a lot of the advocacy work being done is environmental. Idle No More is focused on environmental justice issues, and obviously the impacts to cultural sites, which we didn't address that today because we're talking about protecting rivers, but that's an additional piece of interstate in development that occurs where human remains are removed or significant cultural sites are impacted by development.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add before we close this up?
I think this was great.
Yeah.
Thank you
And
very much.
yeah,
A
this
round
was-
of applause for all of us.
Yeah,
Well, I
yeah.
thought it was terrific too, and I do appreciate you guys coming on. We had a little trouble getting all this organized, but then it's like herding cats when you try to find.
It is. Bob,
Yeah.
I would like to add, Deborah talked about building awareness of the issues, and I would love to point people to our website, www.americanrivers.org, to learn more about American Rivers. You can also Google American Rivers. You can Google America's most endangered rivers, and it'll take you right to that information. So
Okay.
please visit us and engage with us, learn about us, support us. There are many ways you can get involved. So thank you.
All right. That's great. Guys, thanks so much. I appreciate you doing this, and we'll close it off. Thank you. Hey, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Lean to the Left video and that you found it interesting and informative. Please visit on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that focus on progressive politics and the important social issues of our time. Now, our interview shows stream on Mondays with special episodes on Thursdays. And you can check out upcoming shows, guests, and topics at podcast.leantotheleft.net. Subscribe to our audio version there and to our video shows here at YouTube. And follow us on social media. Facebook at Bob Gaddy and the Lean to the Left podcast. Now it's two. Bob Gaddy is one Facebook page, and the Lean to the Left podcast is a second Facebook page. Twitter at Lean to the Left 1. Instagram at Lean to the Left 1. TikTok at Lean to the Left. LinkedIn at Bob Gaddy. And YouTube at Lean to the Left. Now, I hope you'll support Lean to the Left as well so we can keep things going. Just click on the Donate tab at the top of the leantotheleft.net homepage and contribute by buying me a cup of coffee. That'll really help and would be much, much, much appreciated. Now, this is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.